and we are going to go ahead and get started. I know there'll be a few more people trickling in, but we want to get you out on time. Welcome to Asset Protection Tips for Business Owners. I'm Pam Mosquera. With me is Erin Beckman. And we are going to be talking today about legal and insurance and tax strategies as a business owner. We're going to be talking about some common mistakes to avoid and some practical guidelines. And this really is for you if you are a business owner. If you own real estate, we're going to be talking about some concepts as well. If you're sick and tired of getting the wrong information, I know there's a lot of information out there for business owners. And if you really want to take protecting your loved ones to the next level, we're going to be talking to you about that as well. Little disclaimer, because I'm a lawyer, we always have to do disclaimers, right? So we are going to be talking about legal education and not legal advice. What is the difference? Well, from an educational standpoint, in order for it to be advice, we'd have to have that attorney-client relationship. You'd have to hire me. So we are going to be speaking more in the educational context. Anything we say regarding taxes isn't telling you to evade tax laws. It's all legal. So those are my two disclaimers. I'm going to give a quick intro about me, and I know there's going to be some people joining that and watching the recording that don't know Aaron, so he's also going to introduce himself really quickly about why I am so passionate about what we're talking about today. So I grew up in Arizona. I studied civil engineering, worked as a civil engineer for a company called CH2M Hill, if you've heard of it. Came out to Colorado in 2007 and graduated with my law degree 12 years ago in 2010, and started my career out as a deputy district attorney. That's why you see that badge there, and really became passionate about estate planning because I saw the unexpected. And we're going to be talking about some of the principles today, both from a legal and insurance standpoint. And I really saw what families went through, and I wanted to be a part of the process to better protect families. Went into civil practice in 2014 and really spent a lot of time in litigation, both on the insurance defense side and on the plaintiff side. And I share that with you because I know a lot of people who do asset protection and estate planning don't have that litigation experience. They don't understand how policies and their documents get ripped apart. And I'm really passionate about sharing the stories, but also sharing those insights with my clients so that they can better protect their loved ones. I am the owner of a firm called Law Mother. There's some of my team members are up in the top right. We've been honored to serve families Colorado statewide, and we've been recognized by 5280 and Colorado Parent Magazine, and Colorado Super Lawyers. And then also I'm the author of a book that I'm going to share with you at the end, a free copy. So stick around to the end to get the free copy. And I'll pass it over to you, Aaron.
Yeah, thanks, Pam. I know a lot of you on the call or listening to the recording know me as your insurance agent. And I think sometimes you may think that insurance companies just make their agents in labs. But I'm a real person with parents and a family. Was born here in Colorado, a native, one of the few remaining, it seems. And then went to Bishop Matchman High School here in the Denver area, went to the University of St. Thomas out of state in Minnesota, and missed Colorado so much. I came back after graduating, married the beautiful girl in the picture there. That's my wife, Paulina, and got a job working for Madison Insurance, which has become a career. I've been here for my fourth year, finishing my fourth year now, going into my fifth year, finishing my CIC designation, which is a lot of educational information around insurance. And I'm just really passionate about helping business owners protect their livelihood. For a lot of small business owners, their business is their retirement plan. And so Pam is a networking partner of mine and one of the best estate planning attorneys in the state. So I wanted to expand, I guess, on just the insurance products that we offer by bringing her in and talking about both sides of the coin in terms of protecting your assets from a legal perspective and from insurance. So that's kind of what we're going to be diving into today.
Great. So we are going to be talking about 5 tips, and they're up here on the screen. The first tip is timing. So when should you put together an estate plan and asset protection plan? And then tip 2, we're going to be talking about disability. Tip 3, we're going to be talking about death. Tip 4, we're going to be talking about liability. And then tip 5, we're going to wrap it up with some kind of avoiding the do-it-yourself dangers. And how we really have this formatted is I'm going to be talking about each tip from a legal perspective, and then Aaron's going to be talking about his thoughts from an insurance perspective. We'll probably piggyback one after another. And then there's going to be plenty of time, especially because we have a nice small group for Q&A at the end. So please don't be shy. As questions come along, put them in the chat. We'll go back through and we'll take the time to answer all of your questions. But when we're talking about asset protection, I really don't want to lose sight of the why. And if something were to happen to you today, who needs your protection? Let me know in the chat. If something were to happen to me, it's my husband, our daughter, our 2 dogs, which I have shown here. So this is what we're really here about today. And the first tip is, when should you put an asset protection plan in place? Well, the time is now. If you wait until a harm occurs, it's too late. And specifically because Colorado has a fraudulent transfer act, there's also a federal fraudulent transfer act. And that might be a new term to you today, but I'm going to give you some examples to explain what that means. But essentially, the idea here is, if there is a harm that occurs, so someone is injured on one of your properties that you own, or by a vehicle you own, or one type of something related to your business. And then once that happens, you start trying to move assets. Well, it's too late. And the first example I wanted to describe is a car crash case. And this case involved a motorcyclist and a car. And I represented the group of people on the motorcycles. So my client was on the back of a motorcycle. She was going through a green light, and a woman in a car ran a red light and crashed into her. And it was a really bad crash. My client was young mom of 3, had to have her leg amputated. And on scene, my client and the group she was with said that they had the green light, and the woman said she had the green light. And there wasn't cameras at this intersection, unfortunately, so it became a she said situation. Now, I was trial counsel, so I got this case a few weeks before trial and went to trial in front of a jury on the case. And when I was looking into the defendant, the woman who hit my client, I was looking into her file, and I saw that right after the accident, she deeded her home to her brother for $5. Red flag right there, fraudulent transfer. So I was able to bring a separate claim and a separate lien against that property. And then at trial, the jury got to hear the fact that she did this to show potential of consciousness of guilt. Now, ultimately, the jury agreed with my client and awarded her $4 million at trial. Now, the second case involves a business and business property. And my client was the patient at a doctor's office, and unfortunately, she was sexually assaulted by the doctor. She reported it to the medical board right away, and I got the case right away. So she had reached out to me. It just so happened that the press got involved with the case, and so a lot of other survivors came out and made complaints against him. And within a few days of my client making the complaint to the medical board, this doctor owned the home he was in his name, and then the commercial property where his business he also owned. And he started making transfers to his wife of all of his assets. And I could only see the public record assets. Well, because I got involved in the case right away, I did what's called a pre-judgment writ of attachment. And I don't want to get too much into the weeds of legal words, but pre-judgment meaning before we even had a lawsuit. And I was able to go to the judge and say, listen, we haven't filed yet, but we have a valid claim. And this doctor is moving all of his assets, and we're at risk of not being able to collect. Can you please freeze all his assets? The judge agreed. And so when we served this doctor with a lawsuit, we were able to serve all of his banks and freeze all of his assets. So timing matters. And once a harm occurs, it's too late. And notice I say the word harm and not lawsuit, because that's really what the statutes say. So this is the planning you want to do in advance for that reason. And it's perfectly fine to protect your assets, to do wealth preservation strategies ahead of any type of claim. But once a harm occurs, you can be accused of fraudulent transfer. So passing it over to Aaron.
Yeah, absolutely. And Pam makes a great point about timing, because the same is very true with insurance. Insurance is a preventative product, not a responsive product. And so having not only insurance policy in place, but the correct insurance in place, the correct coverages in place ahead of schedule is very important. So what I always tell my clients And for those of you who are listening, I'm sure you remember me saying things like this, but it's important that we talk through your insurance every year. And as changes occur in the business, property, or even acquire a different business, or add maybe a named insured to your business, that you're letting your agent know, hey, these changes are occurring. And if you have a policy in place, I think sometimes the temptation is, well, it will just cover those temporary changes. A lot of policies either won't, or they have limitations on how long they will newly acquired property or newly acquired entity. Maybe it's 30 days or 60 days. And the way the world works, it's Murphy's Law. Stuff always seems to happen on that 31st day or that 61st day. So I think that's just why having a relationship with your agent, similar to putting an estate plan in place, having your insurance products in place, and reviewing them consistently on the front end is so important to how that insurance is going to respond at time. So.
Yeah, and I always, just to piggyback off that, what Aaron's saying, anytime people come to me for asset protection and they want to put in place legal strategies, I always tell them their best use of money, even though I don't sell insurance, is to get good insurance first, because that's going to cover the vast majority, especially for the types of businesses here in Colorado. The vast majority of types of risks you're going to face, you can get good insurance against, and it's going to go a lot farther than entities. And we're going to talk about entities and other options, but good insurance is always the most important piece. All right, so tip number 2 is to plan for disability legally. And the reality is the majority of us will become incapacitated at some point in our life. And the default, if you don't have a plan in place, is that a stranger judge is going to make the decision about your legal, your medical, your financial decisions. Some of you may remember the Terry Schiavo case way back when. She was a young woman who was in her 20s, very healthy, but had sudden cardiac arrest from running. Went into a vegetative state. After 7 years, her husband wanted to take her off life support. Her parents wanted to keep her on life support. And really, there is no default in those situations. The law doesn't say, hey, your parents have your best interest or other family members or your spouse does. And so when there's a conflict, it goes to court. And the Terry Schiavo case, it went to court after court. It got appealed. It became a big national media attention. It got political attention. It became very politicized. So for the vast majority of us, though we won't have these big publicized cases, we will have a situation where if we don't put a plan in place, our loved ones there'll be a lot of conflict down the road potentially. And ultimately, we want to make sure your choices are honored. And we all know the situation with Britney Spears, if you followed that, and kind of what happened with her with not having a plan in place ahead of time. So let's get something in place to protect that. And then from your perspective, Aaron, from an insurance perspective, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think this is a unique topic for business owners in particular, because really for a business owner, particularly one who has like a smaller business where you're the owner and operator of that business, you being out of work is one of the biggest monetary losses that you could face, because the business can't operate without you. You may have a couple employees depending on you to earn an income. And so one thing I think is important to talk about is getting an individual disability policy for the owners of the business. Obviously, if they were to become disabled outside of work, an insurance policy that has proper limits can help just cover some of the expenses of the business. They can pay those bills, maybe keep some of the key employees on payroll, and the policy will consider those things if it's put in place ahead of time. And also, we've talked about some tax advantages. The business itself can actually pay for a disability policy as a benefit to the owner or a key employee, and that can be used as a sort of employee benefit, right? Maybe getting some sort of short-term or long-term disability plan that you can offer to employees to incentivize them, one, to join your company or to stay on board, knowing that if something bad happens, they're covered. And one other thing I always like to talk about is the default is for a lot of business owners to decline workers' comp coverage. If they have employees, they'll tell their work comp company that they themselves do not want that coverage. And so I think a lot of insurance agents just say, okay, that's the default. We're just going to check that box. But if you're an owner of a business and you're operating in the business, and if something were to happen to you while at work and you'd want those injuries to be covered, then you can opt into work comp at a fixed payroll amount. So usually in the state of Colorado, it's $61,000. If you're making well above that, you don't pay anything additional. And that way, if as an owner of a business, if you're operating, particularly in the trades, and something happens to you, your own work comp is another advantage, and sometimes a cheaper alternative to a true disability policy. And the last things I would say is, if you have a partner in your business, same thing, right? What would happen if they were out of the business for an extended period of time? And what are your expenses, in that partnership? So communicating with the people involved in the business to put these things in place on one another, so you can continue to operate the business as usual and on schedule.
All right, great. So tip number 3 is to plan for death. And from a legal perspective, what happens to your assets when you die or become disabled? Well, if you don't have a plan in place, the default plan is the government's plan for you. It's the state of Colorado. And that plan you're not going to like. It's probate, which is often referred to as a lawsuit against yourself for the benefit of your creditors. It's a court process, it's lengthy, it's public, and it's costly. And the biggest misconception I hear is, well, I have a will and I'm covered. And a will is not enough. A will goes through probate, it contains instructions to a judge. So what is the alternative? Well, the biggest and the best alternative is what's called a living trust. And you can think of this as a substitute for a will. It allows you to pass on and protect assets and avoids the probate process. So who should consider a living trust? Well, anyone who owns real estate, anyone who has assets over $75,000, anyone who has children, whether they're minors or adults, anyone who has a business. And as a business owner, if you don't have a plan in place, if you don't have a trust in place, when you die, your business will go through probate. Anyone with special needs beneficiaries, and you want to make sure those beneficiaries have access to government benefits. And anyone that's in a blended family, if you are on a second or third or fourth marriage, and there's kids from prior marriages, we really want to set it up in a way that's going to really protect everyone and keep things in a way that you want things to be passed along. So the number one misconception, the number one reasons that I hear for why people don't put estate plans in place is that estate plans are really only for billionaires. And that's really just not true. It's not so much about how much money you have. It's about how much control you want over your body, over your assets that you've worked so hard to create. And if you don't have a plan in place, Colorado puts one in place for you. It's also really about the experience you want your loved ones to go through down the road. This idea that your spouse gets everything anyway, and that's really not true. If you become incapacitated, there's no default. And eventually the two of you will pass away. And so having a plan in place is important for when that day comes. And this idea that I don't have the money to pay to get a plan in place, well, like many things in life, the long-term costs are more expensive down the road. The default court process is going to cost way more down the road than putting a plan in place. So really, just to summarize, the advantages of holding your assets, including your business, in a living trust is it saves on that probate cost, which on average is between 5 to 9% of your net worth, which is easily, for most of my clients, a 6-figure number, if not higher. The time of probate, your loved ones are going to have to go through between 9 months and 2 years of a court process where they're going to have to hire attorneys and go to court dates. A lot of heirs talk about this feeling like a part-time or full-time job, just thinking about the opportunity cost, the time away from their loved ones that they don't get to spend while they're dealing with a mess to clean up. Everything's private, whereas with a will, everything's going to be published publicly, and it's going to become public record what your kids are going to inherit or your beneficiaries are going to inherit, which really opens them up to a lot of vulnerabilities. Your choices are honored instead of a judge, and then we can really put in place disability protection. And from an asset protection and wealth preservation standpoint, we can really protect assets from future creditors, future divorces, really protect the heirs and minimize taxes. One of the easiest ways to get started with estate planning is to just grab a file folder and put the first page of every asset you own in it. And a lot of times, I had a colleague whose father passed away unexpectedly during the pandemic, and he didn't have anything written down. And that's what happens a lot of times. And she had to go through all of his mail, computer files, trying to find all of his assets. She's still not sure if she has everything. This is a major problem in Colorado. Our Department of Unclaimed Property has over 500 million in it. So assets get lost because it's not organized. So take that first step, get everything organized in one place. And when it comes to kids, the default without a plan is that everything's going to go outright and unprotected. And a lot of times families lose those assets in divorce after the fact. So grandparents will pass on real estate that's been in the family for generations. And then it just takes one kid or grandkid to go through a divorce, and that asset gets lost. But with an asset protection trust, not only can we protect from future divorces, we can also protect from future creditors. We can really build in that guidance to help effectively manage these assets so that your adult children aren't receiving their assets outright at 18, unprotected. None of us make good decisions at 18. Well, except for Aaron, he probably make great decisions at 18, but everyone else, we don't. So I recommend that. All right. And passing on to you, Aaron, for tip number 3 for death.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Pam, if I go over, please feel free to interrupt me because I have a lot to say on this topic in particular. I think a lot of business owners, the temptation is to get so caught up in the day to day, right? It's like, we're just trying to keep this business running, hire new employee, buy new equipment. And a lot of times the idea that the business itself is an asset, what you own in the business and the fact that the business is running and producing income, I think gets lost a lot of times in that hustle and business. And so I think a lot of business owners are surprised, they've been running their business for a while and they get to a point where they need to maybe sell, retire, or transition the business to new ownership, if their kids or someone else, what the value of the business is. I don't think people consider, what is our business actually worth? And so I always think it's really important to have a valuation of the business done, on a semi-regular basis, so you know what you have in your portfolio. Like Pam's saying, if, let's just say, God forbid, something happens to you, and then your partner, the inheritor of the business, marries someone or starts dating someone who has the wrong ideas for the business, if there's not protections put in place from a legal perspective, the business that you've worked so hard to build, or your family has worked so hard to build, could be in jeopardy. And the same is true from a insurance perspective when it comes to death. I think your value to the business, I think a lot of business owners undervalue how much they contribute to the business. They're often wearing multiple hats, and the amount of time it will take for the inheritor of the business, whatever that succession plan is, and hopefully you have one, it will take them to get the business back to normal processing speed is going to take longer than you think as well. So a life insurance policy owned by the business with the death benefit going to the business, not to a inheritor of the business, but where it stays in the business and the funds can be used in a way that's beneficial to the business tax-free, is incredibly valuable. So I think life insurance in your personal plan, like with Pam, for your own estate, for your children and your spouse, that is really important. But I think also having life insurance owned by the business, with the business being the beneficiary. In the similar sense for like a buy-sell agreement. So if you do pass away and you need to buy out a partner or pay off debt, those things can be considered also, as well as key person insurance. There's people in your business that are just so essential, it'd be very, very difficult to replace them. It's not that cash heals all wounds, but it certainly helps at the time of loss. So considering those things, not a lot of people don't want to talk about death, but the reality is it could happen, and often it's fairly affordable. There's tax benefits to purchasing life insurance, and the death benefit is tax-free to the beneficiary. So I'll try to keep it limited to that, but business owners, if you do have more questions about life insurance, I would be happy.
All right, great. And tip number 4 is liability to protection from a legal standpoint. And many of you have entities set up. The idea of having some type of separate entity is really separating your personal and business assets. I think the number one mistake I see, especially for small business owners, is they just go online, they create the entity, but they don't do the final steps to really get that protection. So you really must maintain those corporate formalities. So if you have an LLC, you need the operating agreement, you need to take meeting minutes, you need a separate bank account. And if you start commingling assets, if there was litigation, it could pierce into the corporate veil and reach into your other assets. So I represented a young man who was injured at a nightclub. He was there, kind of innocent bystander situation. There was a shooting and he got hit by fire that wasn't directed to him. And when we sued the entity, when we sued the nightclub was owned by these two gentlemen who owned multiple properties, multiple businesses, but they were commingling assets into all these different entities with their personal. They weren't keeping like formalities. And in Colorado, it's a multi-factor test. And pretty much when I got into deposition, every factor they had failed. So I was arguing that I could pierce into the corporate veil, that I could get into their personal assets. And so it's really important to work with a good business attorney to get that set up. We focus on estate planning at our firm. We kind of tend to quarterback that for our clients. So if you need an estate plan, we're the right firm for you. If you just need kind of that simple entity support, we have some referrals. We're happy to talk to you. And then for all our clients, we help quarterback that, help them get that set up.
All right. And I completely agree, Pam. I think something Pam has opened my eyes to is how easy it is to pierce the corporate veil. And so, one, I think every LLC you set up is important to protect. So some people will set them up and say, well, that LLC is no longer operating, or we shut that LLC down. But if the claim comes in under a formerly known as LLC or a previously operated LLC that's been shut down, there's ways on your insurance policy we can list those things to still offer coverage if a claim comes in. And then also, if a claim does leak over into your personal assets, make sure you have an umbrella policy on your personal. So if you're named personally in a lawsuit, there's an umbrella policy on your personal insurance for that as well. And I think just making sure that your named insureds are correct on a policy. I think when I was just starting out in insurance, I would take people's word for, hey, Aaron, our company's name is 123 LLC. And as I've gotten into the business, I've gotten into the habit of searching on the Secretary of State, and 123 LLC is associated, or you can click, and it's very easy to find the paper trail of, okay, this LLC is actually just a DBA for the real LLC. And having that conversation with your agent, as well as when you do want to keep things separate, keeping separate books and talking to a business attorney about how do I do everything I can to make sure these businesses don't come across one another. And Pam can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think a lot of lawyers at this point know if there's an LLC that has an insurance policy, that's $1 million liability limit just to start. So the more LLCs you have, if a good attorney can show those LLCs are linked, they're counting those numbers as the number of LLCs go up. They're like, okay, that's $1 million, that's another $1 million, that's another $1 million. So it is important to do everything we can to try to create a separation between each of those LLCs, and then obviously your personal assets as well, to ensure that who is considered an insured in an actual lawsuit cannot bleed over to those other LLCs and policies that we put in place. Does that feel pretty accurate to you, Pam? Do you have anything you want to say on that? Because I know we've had some really in-depth conversations around this.
Yeah, I feel like Aaron and I have had lively conversations about it. I think the number one mistake I see with business owners is they don't have good insurance and they set up these LLCs and they feel like that LLC is going to be ironclad protection. And good insurance is going to be that baseline of defense that's going to prevent the majority of claims against you. So really working with your insurance advisor to make sure you're an additional insured personally, making sure you understand the exclusions. And so if you have a certain type, like if you're in a business that has a lot of people that are drivers and their vehicles and they're on the road, and Aaron and I were chatting about a specific issue with someone having a prior DUI and not being able to get coverage and things like that. Like those are the areas where not understanding where the insurance doesn't cover tend to be the biggest surprise when we get into litigation. Both when I represented, when I worked for the insurance companies and I represented insured, and when I was on the plaintiff side, people just don't understand this concept very well. So yeah, I absolutely agree. So tip number 5, our final tip, we have plenty of time for Q&A, and it looks like I'm just going to admit one more person, is to work with an advisor, avoid doing it yourself. And from an estate planning aside, it's very popular for people to go online and try to create their own estate plans. I would say the caution about those plans is you get what you paid for. A lot of times they're drafted for other states' laws besides Colorado. They're really set for one size fits all. They're really not set up to protect business owners. They don't support you for funding, which is what we talked about, that concept of putting assets in your trust so that you're protected. And these plans often fail. So the example I like to give, there was this woman in Texas who was probably more basic than everyone here on the call with her assets. She owned a piece of real estate and she had a retirement account. So she went on one of these websites and created a will, and she gave her real estate to her son and her retirement account to her daughter. Well, she lived for another 20 years. And as you might expect, she used up all that money in the retirement account. And her real estate was worth a lot of money, and she died, and her son inherited this very valuable piece of real estate, and her daughter inherited nothing. And so her daughter went to her brother and said, "Hey, this is not what mom would have wanted." And the brother's response was, "That's what she put in her will that she drafted online," right? So they went into litigation. It was very costly. If their mom would have spent that money, just a very small amount of money, a couple $1,000s, put together an estate plan, really would have saved all that time and money down the road, and all that conflict. It really does rip apart those families. So I don't know if you have anything to add from that from an insurance standpoint, but I know from my perspective, when people try to get quotes online, they really don't understand the complexities that a business owner has as far as getting that protection that, you can set up. But is there anything to add for that as well?
Yeah, and I'm smiling because most people on this call are clients of mine. They work with me, so they understand the importance of having an agent. But yeah, I just think even when I work with someone, there's no one size fits all. And I'm sure people on this call and listening to the recording can relate. Like, gosh, Aaron just asked for so much information. He's always digging into like, what's our EIN number? Why does it matter how many employees we have? And it's because those rating factors do make a difference. And so I get asked a lot, hey, can you give me an apples to apples quote? And that's often not the case. I'll look at someone's policy and I can quote it apples to apples, but it's not usually the reality. Like just recently, I had a opportunity to work with a new client. They sent me their policies. I asked them a bunch of questions, and when I talked to them in person, their sales were almost $8 million. And on their policy, it was rated on $1.2 million. So I asked them, hey, what's the difference here? And they said, oh, well, that was, we got this policy during COVID, and the business has grown tremendously since then. And I told them, I said, hey, that's great, but if I give you an apples to apples quote, I can guarantee you're going to have a huge audit at the end of next year. So it's situations like that, and I'm sure you can imagine many others, where it's just so important to have a good relationship with your agent, be updating your policies. There is no one size fits all, and a lot of the online solutions are just not going to be comprehensive enough for even the most basic of businesses. So yeah, I think if you have someone who is working on their own business insurance and frustrated or doesn't know what they have covered, in the same way, I would ask you send them to Pam for estate planning. I'd be happy to talk to them about their business insurance.
Great. So how is everyone doing right now? You can let me know in the chat. You may feel a little bit like the girl in this picture. Does anyone feel like that? Let people give us some responses. So I know I talk really fast, especially about estate planning, because I'm so passionate about it. And I don't want you to leave feeling overwhelmed. We're going to stay around from Q&A as well, but the goal wasn't to overwhelm you. I really wanted to give you as much resources and tools and for you to understand what's possible. So what I'd like to do is I have put together a special offer for you because you've taken the time to attend today. And if you give me permission to spend about 5 minutes sharing with you that special offer, and I'm just going to look at the chat, let me know if you are okay with me spending the next 5 minutes sharing with you a special offer because you've taken the time. I'm going to continue because I don't see any objections. So the offer, because you've taken the time to get educated today, is a family wealth planning session. And this is a 2-hour Zoom meeting with me where it's a working session. As an attorney, I'm going to give you a personalized strategy to protect you and the people you love. I'm going to get everything financially organized for you. We're going to go through all of our assets and we're going to talk about how things would pass right now if something were to happen to you, what you like about it, what you don't like about it, and I'm going to make some recommendations. And we typically charge $750 for this session because it's 2 hours of my time as an attorney. But because you've taken the time to get educated, because you're here today, and for those of you who are watching the replay as well, we're reducing that to $100. So you get all that value for just $100 instead of $750. There's a catch because there's always a catch, right? You must book with us by the close of business tomorrow. We only have a few slots available before the end of the year. If you're watching the replay, we only kind of budget a certain amount per webinar that we do. So whenever you're watching this, please get back to us by close of business tomorrow and we will honor this offer within reason. Like if it's 2026 and you're watching this, we probably won't, but I would say we'll honor this for 2023 for anyone who's watching the replay. So we do ask you to do some intake paperwork ahead of time. That's really to your benefit because I review it ahead of time. I come to the meeting prepared. I can give you the best value. So that is one of the requirements for the offer as well. So if you'd like to take advantage of this offer, I'm going to put in the chat the link to schedule a 15-minute call with my team. And that's how you can go ahead and take advantage of it. I'll also, for those of you, I know there's a few people listening to the replay and who work with Aaron directly. So if you also feel free to reach out to him if you're looking for this link. But I am trying to pull it up to put it in the chat. Looks like a few people might be clicking on it. So sometimes it takes a second to load. But I will put that in the chat. Once you go to this website, and it's important to include the /go, you'll be brought to this page that you see here. At the top, you're going to see free access to our free webinar. That is a 30-minute webinar that really dives into planning for parents. So if you're a parent and you want to hear more about that level of estate planning, you can listen to that or share that with your spouse. But the button that you're really going to want to click on is the one that says free 15-minute consult with Kimberly. And when you click on that, it's going to bring up her calendar. Kim's awesome at our office. You'll really enjoy her. And just get in touch with us by end of day tomorrow. Schedule that by end of day tomorrow. You don't have to speak with us by end of day tomorrow. You just need to get it scheduled. And on that 15-minute call, she's going to answer any questions you have, get you scheduled, all of those good things. I promised a free copy of my book. So if you head over to lawmother.com/free book, that's a link to download the ebook and the audiobook. So that's also a gift for being here today. And website contact information is there. All of Aaron's information is there as well. And yeah, anyone, thank you for being here. Thanks for spending your lunch hour with us. Let us know in the chat if you have any questions. You're welcome for the book. Anyone else have any questions? We'll give it a moment to see if anyone has questions. I guess a question for you, Aaron, while we're waiting. Oh, someone's question might be coming. Probate, does this always happen even if we have a trust set up? No. So if you have a trust set up and the assets are in the trust, it will avoid probate. That's a great question. So that's the good advantage of having a trust, making sure you stay up to date with it, making sure that you have the assets in it, and it will avoid probate. That's a great question. You are welcome. Yeah, so kind of question for you, Aaron, for kind of business owners who are on today. as it gets to kind of the end of the year, when is a good time for them to be kind of doing those audits? Is it something that they should be thinking about, like, to do in December before January? How time sensitive is it? I know I work with you personally for my business, and you're wonderful to work with. And I know for you, it's kind of my renewal period, but I know there's other opportunities for certain types of businesses. So how does that all work?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. So really, I always tell business owners when you do your end of year tax planning, so like as you file your taxes, just because that's required by the government, keep track of those numbers. And that's a good time to call me and say, hey, Aaron, we did better than expected last year, or we're down from last year, just because I can usually kind of use those numbers as a reference to your policy period, which runs annually from at least. So sometimes people's insurance policy doesn't line up with 1/1 to 1/1, and I don't expect it to. But we can use that tax data to help make sure your policy is accurate. And then for like in the situation that my prospective client has, where they're $6 million under where they should be, the insurance companies are going to get their pound of flesh. So they will conduct an audit themselves at the end of the policy period. And if there's a major discrepancy like that, they do have the ability to go back and charge for the difference in premium. So in a case like that, I mean, I called them as soon as I found out and said, hey, you may want to call your insurance company and bump your sales in the middle of the year here, because otherwise you're going to be hit with a massive charge all at once at the end of the policy year. Whereas if you make the change halfway through the current term, at least that will be split up over the remaining payments on the policy. So yeah, I think it's going to be reconciled one way or the other. It's just, do you like writing one big check, or would you rather split it all up throughout the year?
Why is the sales relevant? Is it for them, like, ensuring their inventory, like physical inventory, or is it for like a disability policy?
Yeah, so on a liability policy, oftentimes there's a rating factor. Sales is the most common. So the company says, hey, for this class of business, we think it's fair to charge $1 for every $1,000 of sales, and that becomes the rate. So that's why your premium is determined. And there's a lot of math behind the scenes that I'm not smart enough to figure out. But basically, the higher your sales are, the more premium you pay. And the same is true like on work comp, it's payroll. And for property insurance, like you're saying, that's property values. So if they have more inventory, or the building they own is more expensive to replace, that's just how they determine how much you're charged. So that's why smaller businesses are charged less premiums, because they have less in sales and payroll, whereas a larger business pays more in premium because it's the same rate. It's just there's more a rating factor. So.
All right, great. Yeah, that's good to know. I just started having those end of year conversations with my tax lawyer, so I will shoot you an email.
Yeah, feel free.
Well, thank you everyone for being on. We will be sharing the recording with everyone who attended. So if there's anyone that is in your life that you think would benefit from this, please do feel free to share the recording. And then we'll also send it to, I know there was quite a few people who registered who couldn't make it. So we'll be sure to send that out. And thank you all for coming.
Hi, everyone.